I was getting ready to go to my son's house for dinner when my lawyer texted me, "Just call me, immediately." I dialed his number. What he told me about my new daughter-in-law shocked me. Within hours, I was standing in my son's driveway, knowing his perfect marriage was about to crumble. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I got to this moment, because what started as an innocent dinner invitation became the most dramatic night of my 68-year life. My name is Margaret Thompson, and 6 months ago I thought I was the luckiest mother-in-law in America. My son James had finally found love with Cassandra, a charming pediatric nurse who seemed to adore both him and his old-fashioned mother. When they asked me to sell my house to help fund their dream wedding, I didn't hesitate. After all, they promised I'd always have a place with them. That Tuesday afternoon, I was pressing my good dress, the navy one with tiny flowers that James always said made me look distinguished, when my phone buzzed with Robert Mitchell's urgent text. Robert had been my attorney for 15 years, ever since my husband died. He never contacted me after business hours, unless something was seriously wrong. "Margaret," his voice was tight when I called. "I need you to sit down." I perched on my bed in the small apartment I'd rented after selling my house. The cheerful yellow walls I'd painted to brighten my spirits suddenly felt garish under the afternoon light. "What's wrong, Robert? Is it about the will revisions we discussed?" "No, Margaret, this is about Cassandra, about your son's wife." My stomach dropped. "What about Cassie? She's not who she claims to be." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. You can smell the danger, but you can't quite see the flames yet. I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Cassandra Williams Thompson doesn't exist. At least not the version your son married." I laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Robert, that's ridiculous. I've known Cassie for over a year. She's a nurse at Children's Hospital. She grew up in Colorado, lost her parents in a car accident when she was 25. Margaret, there is no record of a Cassandra Williams ever working at Children's Hospital. The woman your son married has been using a false identity." The dress slipped from my hands onto the floor. Through my small window, I could see the maple tree where I'd hung a bird feeder, watching cardinals visit throughout the lonely winter months. Such a normal view for such an abnormal conversation. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I'm afraid it's not. My investigator started looking into her background for the insurance policy updates you requested. What he found?" Robert paused. "Margaret, you need to get to your son's house immediately. Don't call ahead. Don't warn them you're coming. Just go." As I drove to James's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I thought about how eagerly I'd embraced my new daughter-in-law. Maybe too eagerly. When you've been widowed for 15 years and your only child lives his busy life in another world of career success and social obligations, a warm, attentive daughter-in-law feels like a gift from heaven. Cassie had seemed to genuinely enjoy my company, calling me Mom Thompson with such affection that it made my heart flutter. She'd been the one who suggested I sell my house. "Mom Thompson," she'd said over coffee in my kitchen, her hazel eyes wide with concern, "this place is getting too big for you to manage alone. And honestly, the neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be. I'd lived in that house for 37 years, raised James there, nursed my husband through his final illness in the bedroom overlooking the garden I'd tended for decades. But Cassie painted such a picture of independence and fresh starts that I found myself nodding along. "James and I have been talking," she'd continued, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We're going to need help with the wedding expenses. I know it's a lot to ask, but if you sold this house, you could help us start our life together properly, and you could get a cute little apartment closer to us. We could see each other so much more often." The wedding had cost $47,000. I'd contributed $35,000 from the sale of my house, money I'd planned to live on for the rest of my retirement. But seeing James's face light up as he danced with his bride had made every penny seem worth it, or so I'd thought. Now pulling into their driveway behind James's BMW, I felt sick. The house they'd bought with the remainder of my money looked so perfect in the evening light, with its manicured lawn and designer landscaping. Through the front window, I could see them moving around the kitchen, preparing for my visit. They looked happy, normal, like a young couple excited to host James's mother for dinner. I sat in my car for a long moment, watching them through that window. Whatever Robert's investigator had discovered, my son didn't know about it yet. In a few minutes, I was going to destroy his world. But as I watched Cassie laugh at something James said, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair, I realized something that made my blood run cold. She'd been playing a role this entire time. Every conversation, every shared meal, every moment I'd felt grateful for her presence in our lives. It had all been an act. And I'd not only fallen for it, I'd paid for the privilege. James opened the door with his usual broad smile, wrapping me in the kind of hug that reminded me he'd always be my little boy, even at 42. "Mom, perfect timing. Cassie's making her famous lasagna." He stepped back, and I noticed something I'd never seen before. He looked tired. Not just end-of-workday tired, but bone-deep exhausted. "Everything all right, honey?" I asked, following him into the living room. "Just work stuff. You know how it is in consulting." But his smile didn't reach his eyes. Cassie emerged from the kitchen wearing a floral apron over designer jeans, looking like she'd stepped out of a home magazine. "Mom Thompson, I'm so glad you could make it." She hugged me with the same warmth she'd shown for months, and for a moment I doubted everything Robert had told me. This couldn't be an act. No one was that good at pretending. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, she said. "Can I get you some wine?" I opened that Pinot Grigio you brought last time. As she bustled back to the kitchen, I noticed something else I'd overlooked before. The house was decorated entirely in Cassie's taste. Not a single item reflected James's personality, not his college football memorabilia, not the antique clock his father had left him, not even the painting he'd loved from our old house. It was as if James Thompson had been erased from his own home. "Cassie certainly has strong decorating opinions," I said carefully. James glanced around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "Yeah, she has great taste. Says my old stuff made the place look like a bachelor pad." But his voice carried a note I recognized, the same tone he'd used as a child when defending choices he wasn't entirely comfortable making. "James," I said quietly, "can we talk privately for a minute?" Cassie appeared in the doorway instantly, as if she'd been listening. "Is everything okay?" "Fine, sweetheart," I said with a smile that felt like glass. "I just wanted to ask James about his work presentation next week." Her eyes narrowed slightly, so slightly that 6 months ago I would have missed it. But now I was looking for cracks in her performance, and I found them. "Actually," James said, "I should check on something in my office anyway. Mom, want to see the new computer setup Cassie got me?" As we walked down the hall, I caught a glimpse of Cassie in my peripheral vision. She wasn't moving toward the kitchen. She was standing perfectly still, watching us go. And the expression on her face wasn't the warm concern of a loving wife. It was calculation. In James's office, the one room that still looked like him, I closed the door and turned to face my son. "James, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. How much do you really know about Cassie's past?" James sat down heavily in his desk chair, and I saw something in his expression that broke my heart. Relief, as if someone had finally asked the question he'd been afraid to ask himself. "Why?" he said quietly. "What's wrong? Answer me first. What do you actually know about her background?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "She grew up in Denver, lost her parents in a car accident when she was 25, worked her way through nursing school, moved here 3 years ago for a fresh start. Have you ever seen pictures of her family? Her childhood home? Nursing school graduation? She says it's too painful to talk about. The accident was traumatic," but doubt was creeping into his voice. "Mom, what's going on?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the text thread with Robert. My attorney's investigator looked into Cassie's background for some insurance paperwork. "James, there's no record of a Cassandra Williams ever working at Children's Hospital." The color drained from his face. "That's impossible. She gets calls from the hospital. She talks about her patients. When have you actually heard these calls?" James opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. His eyes grew wide with a realization that was clearly painful. She takes them in the other room. Says patient confidentiality requires privacy. Have you ever visited her at work? Met her colleagues? She said the hospital has strict policies about personal visitors in the pediatric ward. His voice was barely a whisper now. "Mom, you're scaring me." "I'm scared too, honey. But there's more." Before I could continue, we heard the kitchen timer go off, followed by Cassie's cheerful call. "Dinner's ready." James looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the 8-year-old boy who'd come to me when the neighborhood bullies made him doubt himself. What do I do? We go eat dinner, I said, and we act normal while I figure out how to tell you the rest. But as we walked back down the hall, I saw Cassie standing at the stove, and something about her posture, too rigid, too alert, told me she'd heard more of our conversation than we'd realized. The dining room table was set with the good china, my good china actually, that I'd given them as a wedding gift. Cassie had prepared a beautiful meal, everything perfect, down to the cloth napkins and fresh flowers. "This looks wonderful, dear," I said, taking my seat. "I wanted everything to be special," Cassie replied, but her smile seemed forced now. "James has been so stressed with work lately. I thought a nice family dinner might help." As we began eating, I watched my daughter-in-law carefully. Every gesture, every expression, every word choice, looking for the woman Robert's investigator had discovered underneath the performance. And slowly, I began to see her. "So, Mom Thompson," Cassie said, cutting her lasagna with surgical precision, "how are you settling into your new apartment? I hope you don't regret selling the house." There was something in her tone, too casual, too pointed, that made my nerves sharpen. "Actually, I've been wondering about that," I said carefully. "It's been almost a year since I sold it, and I realize I never got a clear picture of where all that money went." James looked up from his plate. "What do you mean?" "Well, you said the wedding cost $47,000, and I contributed $35,000, but I gave you $50,000 total. What happened to the other 15? Silence fell over the table like a heavy blanket. James frowned, clearly doing mental math, while Cassie's fork paused halfway to her mouth. There were additional expenses," Cassie said finally. "The honeymoon, some house improvements, my student loan payments." "Your student loan payments?" I kept my voice light, conversational. "I thought you said you worked your way through nursing school." Another pause. I had to take some loans for the final year. My savings ran out." But James was staring at her now with growing confusion. "Cassie, you never mentioned student loans. When we applied for the mortgage, you said you had no debt." I watched the careful mask slip from her face for just a moment, long enough to see the flash of panic underneath. Then it was back in place, but not quite as perfectly as before. "I was embarrassed about the debt," she said, reaching for James's hand. "You were doing so well financially, and I didn't want you to think less of me." "But where are the loan statements?" James pressed. "I handle all our finances now. I've never seen any student loan payments going out." Cassie pulled her hand away and stood up abruptly. "I need to check on dessert." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving James and me alone with the weight of unanswered questions. "Mom," James whispered, "what else did your investigator find?" I pulled out the folder Robert had given me and set it on the table between us. "Her real name is Catherine Blackwood. She's 34, not 38 like she told you. She was married twice before. Both marriages ended when her husbands discovered she'd been systematically draining their bank accounts." James stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "This can't be right. The woman you married is a professional con artist, James. She targets successful, recently widowed, or lonely men. She studies them, becomes exactly who they need her to be, marries them quickly, and then begins the financial extraction." From the kitchen came the sound of running water and cabinet doors opening and closing, normal dinner cleanup sounds. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Cassie was listening to every word. "The $15,000 from my house money?" I continued quietly. "She didn't use it for student loans or house improvements. She sent it to an account in Phoenix, where her sister lives. Her sister who supposedly died in that car accident with their parents." James was shaking his head slowly, like a man trying to wake up from a nightmare. "But she loves me. I know she loves me. Honey, she's very good at her job." The kitchen had gone suspiciously quiet. James noticed too, his head turning toward the doorway. "Cassie, everything okay in there?" No response. I felt a chill run down my spine. "James, where does she keep her purse?" "On the counter by the door. Why?" We both stood at the same time, moving quickly but quietly toward the kitchen. It was empty. The back door stood slightly ajar, and a cool evening breeze was stirring the curtains. "Her purse is gone," James said, his voice hollow. "So I did." I walked to the door and looked out into their backyard. At the far end, near the fence, I could see a figure moving quickly through the shadows. "She's running," I said. James rushed to the front window. "Her car's still here. She probably has another one parked nearby. James, listen to me carefully. We need to call Robert immediately, and then we need to call the police." But James was staring at the dining room table where Cassie's phone lay next to her abandoned plate. She left her phone. I picked it up. It wasn't locked. Another red flag I'd missed. The call history was mostly empty, but the text messages told a different story. Messages to someone named Marcus. "The old lady is getting suspicious. How much longer do I need to keep this up? The account in Phoenix needs more time." And then, from earlier today, emergency. She hired a PI need extraction plan now. "James," I said quietly, "sit down." He was reading over my shoulder, his face getting paler with each message. She was planning to leave anyway. Yes, but not until she'd taken everything she could. I scrolled to the Photos app. It was mostly empty, but there were several screenshots, pictures of bank statements, insurance documents, and investment accounts. All of them belonged to James. "She's been documenting your assets," I said, planning her final withdrawal. James sank into a chair, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd been living with a stranger. "How long do you think she was going to wait?" I thought about the timeline, about the way Cassie had been pushing for joint accounts, for access to James's retirement funds, for me to sell my house and contribute more money. "I think she was planning to disappear right after she convinced you to make her the beneficiary of your life insurance policy," I said. "She mentioned that last week, didn't she? Said it was important for married couples to update their beneficiaries?" James nodded slowly. "She said we should do it after dinner tonight. She even had the forms ready." We looked at each other across the wreckage of what had been, just an hour ago, a happy family dinner. My son's marriage was over. The woman he'd loved, trusted, built a life with, had never existed at all. But there was something else in James's eyes now, alongside the pain and shock, something that looked like relief. "You know what the worst part is, Mom?" he said quietly. "I think part of me already knew." The police arrived within 20 minutes, but by then we all knew Cassie was long gone. Detective Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman about my age, listened to our story with the weary expression of someone who'd seen this particular tragedy before. "Ma'am," she said to me after examining Cassie's abandoned phone, "you probably saved your son from losing everything he owns. These marriage fraudsters typically escalate quickly once they have legal access to assets." James was sitting at his kitchen island, staring at the insurance forms Cassie had prepared for him to sign. "She was so insistent we do this tonight," he murmured. "Said it was romantic to make each other beneficiaries." "Romantic," I repeated dryly. "Nothing says I love you like $1 million life insurance policy." Detective Rodriguez almost smiled at that. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to need you to work with our financial crimes unit. Your attorney's investigation gives us a significant head start, but we need to trace all the money movements and identify other potential victims." Other victims. The phrase hit me like cold water. "How many others do you think there are?" James asked. "Based on the pattern your mother's investigator uncovered, possibly dozens. Catherine Blackwood has been operating this scheme for at least 8 years across 4 different states." I felt sick thinking about other mothers who'd given their life savings to help their son's happiness, only to watch it disappear into the pockets of a professional predator. Other men like James, who'd been manipulated into believing they'd found true love. "Detective," I said, "what are the chances we'll get the money back?" "Honestly, slim. These operations are designed to move money quickly through multiple accounts and jurisdictions, but we might be able to prevent her from victimizing others." After the police left, James and I sat in his living room surrounded by the remnants of Cassie's deception. Her coffee mug still sat on the side table, lipstick stain perfectly preserved. Her sweater draped over the back of the couch as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. "I have to ask you something, Mom," James said quietly, "and I need you to be honest with me." I braced myself. "Did you ever like her? Really like her? Or did something always feel off?" I thought carefully before answering. The truth was complicated. I wanted to like her so much that I ignored my instincts, I said finally. There were little things that bothered me, but I told myself I was being an overprotective mother-in-law. The way she never had stories from childhood that included specific details. How she always deflected when I asked about her nursing school friends. The fact that in all the months I knew her, Not one person from her past ever called or visited. James nodded slowly. She said she preferred to live in the present rather than dwell on the past. I thought it was healthy, progressive. It was careful, I corrected, and we both mistook careful for admirable. My phone rang. Robert's name appeared on the screen. The investigator found something else, Robert said without preamble. Can you and James come to my office first thing tomorrow morning? What kind of something else? The kind that's going to make you very angry. The next morning, Robert's office felt different. Instead of the usual calm atmosphere of legal consultations, there was an energy that reminded me of a war room. Papers covered every surface, and a man I didn't recognize sat at the conference table with a laptop and several manila folders. Margaret, James, this is Detective Frank Morrison from the Multi-State Financial Crimes Task Force. Detective Morrison stood to shake our hands. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of focused intensity that made you pay attention. Mrs. Thompson, your decision to investigate Cassandra Williams may have broken open the largest marriage fraud operation we've seen in the past decade. He opened one of the folders and spread out photographs, driver's licenses, wedding photos, and what looked like surveillance images. All featured the same woman, but with different hair colors, different names, different men beside her. Catherine Blackwood, alias Cassandra Williams, alias Christine Wilson, alias Carol Warner, Detective Morrison continued. 4 different identities that we know of, possibly more. 17 confirmed victims across Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and now New Mexico. James stared at a wedding photo showing Cassie, or Catherine, or whoever she really was, in a white dress, smiling radiantly next to a man who wasn't him. How long has she been doing this? Our earliest confirmed case dates back 9 years, but we suspect she's been refining this operation much longer. I studied the faces in the photographs. The victims, not Catherine. They all had something in common. Middle-aged professional men, most of them recently divorced or widowed. All of them with that slightly desperate look of people who'd given up on finding love and then stumbled into what seemed like a miracle. What's her total take? I asked. Detective Morrison consulted his notes. Conservative estimate, $2.3 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. James made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan. But here's what's interesting, the detective continued. In every previous case, she disappeared within 6 to 8 months of marriage. With your son, she stayed for almost a year. That suggests something different about this operation. Different how? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew the answer. She was building something bigger. The other victims lost their savings, their homes, sometimes their retirement accounts. But none of them had a wealthy mother who could be manipulated into contributing additional funds. The room went very quiet. I felt James's eyes on me, but I kept staring at the photographs spread across the table. You're saying I was the long-term target, I said finally. James was just the entry point. That's our working theory. Everything about the timeline supports it. She met James right after his promotion was announced in the Business Journal. She researched his family, learned about your husband's life insurance payout, your property value, your close relationship with your son. I thought about all those conversations where Cassie had gently probed about my finances, my plans for retirement, my thoughts about leaving James an inheritance versus enjoying my money while I was alive. I'd thought she was being thoughtful. Instead, she'd been calculating. So what now? James asked. Detective Morrison leaned forward. Now we set a trap. Absolutely not, James said immediately. I won't let my mother become bait for this woman. It's not your choice, I said calmly, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. It's mine. We were still in Robert's office, but the atmosphere had shifted from information gathering to strategy planning. Detective Morrison had outlined his proposal. Use me to lure Catherine back into contact, hopefully catching her in an attempt to access more money. Mrs. Thompson, the detective said, I understand your son's concerns. This isn't without risk. But Catherine's pattern suggests she won't be able to resist coming back for what she sees as unfinished business. What makes you so sure she'll contact my mother? James asked. Robert pulled out another file. Because according to the investigator's financial analysis, she never got access to the main prize. Margaret, show him your bank statements. I'd brought my financial records as requested, though I wasn't sure why they mattered now. James looked at the numbers and frowned, Mom, this shows you still have over $300,000 in savings and investments. I thought the house sale money was most of what you had. I let you think that because I didn't want you to feel guilty about accepting my help, I said. But your father's life insurance and our retirement savings were substantial. The house money was extra. Detective Morrison nodded. Catherine spent months setting up the perfect scenario to access these funds. She's not going to walk away from $300,000 without trying again. But she knows we discovered her deception, James protested. Does she? I asked, thinking it through. She ran when she overheard us talking, but she doesn't know how much we learned or what evidence we found. For all she knows, we just had suspicions. Detective Morrison smiled. Exactly. And that's where you come in, Mrs. Thompson. We're going to let her think she still has a chance. The plan was elegantly simple. I would reach out to Catherine through a mutual contact, a nurse at the hospital where she'd claimed to work, but who was actually part of a network Catherine used for references and false employment verification. I would express confusion and hurt about her sudden disappearance, but not accusation. You'll play the concerned mother-in-law who thinks maybe James said something to upset her, Detective Morrison explained. You want to help fix their marriage. You're worried about your son's happiness. And if she takes the bait, she'll come back with a story, something that explains her disappearance and makes James the villain. She'll probably claim he was abusive or controlling, that she was afraid for her safety, but she still loves him and wants to work things out. I thought about the woman who'd sat at my son's dinner table, who'd hugged me with such apparent warmth, who'd called me Mom Thompson with tears in her eyes when James proposed. How much of that performance would she resurrect to get her hands on my money? There's something else, I said quietly. Something I haven't told you. All three men looked at me expectantly. Last week, Cassie asked me about my estate planning. She said she was concerned about James's financial security if something happened to me. She wanted to know if I'd considered making provisions for his spouse in my will. Detective Morrison's eyes lit up. She was setting up the endgame. I think she was planning to arrange an accident, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Not immediately, but eventually, after she'd secured access to James's assets and arranged to inherit mine. The room went very quiet again. James had gone pale. Mom, you can't do this. It's too dangerous. I looked at my son, my successful, intelligent son, who'd been completely fooled by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone to his mother's bank account. Honey, I said, I've been handling dangerous situations longer than you've been alive. And right now, I'm the only chance we have to stop her from doing this to someone else's family. 3 days later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Santa Fe, waiting for Catherine Blackwood to walk back into my life. She'd responded to my carefully worded message exactly as Detective Morrison had predicted. Poor, frightened Cassie, devastated by James's sudden jealousy and controlling behavior, but desperate to save their marriage if there was any way to do it. She loved him so much, but she'd been scared. Could I possibly meet with her? Could I help her understand what had gone wrong? I'd agreed immediately, playing the part of the concerned mother-in-law who just wanted her children to be happy. The performance had felt natural, probably because part of it was still true. I did want James to be happy. I just wanted it to be with someone real. Detective Morrison and his team were positioned around the coffee shop, but I felt oddly calm sitting there alone. Maybe it was because I finally knew exactly who I was dealing with. The uncertainty had been worse than the truth. At exactly 2 p.m., she walked in. She looked different. Darker hair, less makeup, clothes that suggested struggle rather than success. But it was definitely the woman who'd stolen a year of my son's life and $50,000 of my money. Mom Thompson, she said, approaching my table with tears already forming in her eyes. Thank you so much for agreeing to see me. I stood and hugged her, the way a loving mother-in-law would, while internally marveling at her audacity. Of course, sweetheart. I've been so worried about you. She sat down across from me, and I found myself studying her face with new eyes. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see the calculation behind every expression, the slight delay before each emotional response as she decided what reaction would serve her best. I don't know where to start, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Everything happened so fast. James just... He changed. He became suspicious of everything I did, every phone call, every friend. He started accusing me of things, saying I was lying about my past. What kind of things? I asked gently. He said I'd never worked at the hospital, which is ridiculous. He called them pretending to be someone else, asking about me. But of course they couldn't give out information about employees to random callers. When they wouldn't confirm my employment, he decided that meant I'd been lying. I nodded sympathetically. That does sound like a misunderstanding. And then he found some old photos on my phone from before we met. Pictures with a friend's husband at a group dinner, and he became convinced I'd been married before. He wouldn't listen when I tried to explain. The lies flowed so smoothly, each one designed to cast James as paranoid and unreasonable, while positioning her as the victim of his unfounded suspicions. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her. Cassie, I said carefully. James showed me some documents, bank records and things. He seemed to think there were financial irregularities. For just a moment, her composure slipped. I saw a flash of cold calculation before the tears returned. That's the worst part, she said. He's convinced I took money from your house sale. Mom Thompson, I would never. I love this family. You've been like a real mother to me. She reached across the table and took my hand, and I had to resist the urge to pull away. I know, sweetheart, I said. But James seems very sure about what he found. Maybe if you could just explain the bank transfers, show him where the money went. What bank transfers? She asked, but her grip on my hand had tightened. The $15,000 that went to Phoenix, I said quietly. He thinks you sent it to someone there. Catherine went very still. When she looked up at me again, all pretense had disappeared from her eyes. How much do you really know? She asked, her voice completely different now, harder, colder, without any trace of the sweet daughter-in-law I'd thought I loved. I smiled at her, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt genuinely happy. Everything, Catherine, I said. We know everything. The transformation was remarkable to watch. In the space of seconds, Catherine Blackwood shed every trace of the vulnerable, heartbroken young wife and revealed herself as the predator she'd always been. You have no idea what you're dealing with, she said, her voice low and dangerous. That money is gone, and there's nothing you can do to get it back. Actually, I said, there's quite a lot we can do. I gestured slightly, and Detective Morrison materialized at our table as if he'd been invisible until that moment. 2 other officers appeared at the exits. Catherine Blackwood, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. She didn't struggle as they cuffed her, but the look she gave me was pure venom. This isn't over. You can't prove half of what you think you know. We don't need to prove half, Detective Morrison said pleasantly. We only need to prove enough. As they led her away, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice was finally being served, not just for James and me, but for all the other families she'd destroyed. Sadness because I genuinely liked the person I thought she was, even if that person had never existed. James appeared at my side as the police car pulled away. Are you okay, Mom? I'm fine, I said, and realized I meant it. Better than fine, actually. What happens now? Now we rebuild, I said, and we do it honestly this time. 6 months later, James and I were sitting on the deck of my new house, a smaller place that I'd bought with my own money, chosen because I liked it, not because someone else convinced me I needed it. The legal proceedings were ongoing, but Detective Morrison was confident they'd recover at least some of the stolen money from Catherine's network of accounts. I got a letter today, James said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket, from one of Catherine's other victims, a man in Colorado whose case helped build the prosecution's pattern evidence. What did he say? He thanked us, said knowing other people had been through the same thing helped him feel less stupid for falling for her act. I looked at my son, who was slowly returning to the person he'd been before Catherine had systematically isolated him and undermined his confidence. You weren't stupid, James. None of us were. We were human. Still feels pretty stupid. Well, I said with a smile, if we're going to feel stupid about something, let's at least feel stupid about something worthwhile, like believing in love instead of assuming the worst about everyone we meet. James laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from him in months. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise, I said dryly. You just stopped listening to me for a while there. As the sun set over the mountains, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. I'd lost money, but I'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I could trust my instincts, that I could take action when action was needed, and that sometimes the people trying to protect you need protection themselves. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Final restitution hearing scheduled. Looks like we'll recover about 60% of what was taken. I showed the message to James. That's better than Detective Morrison originally thought we'd get. What will you do with it? I considered the question. The money would be welcome, of course, but it wasn't what mattered most anymore. I think, I said slowly, I'll donate some of it to a fund for fraud victims, and maybe use some to take a very long vacation. Somewhere warm, where nobody knows my story, and I can just be a woman enjoying her retirement. That sounds perfect, Mom. Want to come with me? James smiled. I thought you'd never ask. As we sat together in comfortable silence, I realized that Catherine Blackwood had inadvertently given me something valuable after all. She'd reminded me that Margaret Thompson was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than even I had remembered. And sometimes, that's the most valuable gift of all. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.